For the last 2 decades, getting to viable was the first real stage of building anything, and it took real resources to get there. Now, that bar is pretty much gone. You can ship viable by next Sunday, because viable is fast now, and viable is cheap now. So, question is, what's left? Hey, I'm Hack, and in this video, we'll talk about why minimum viable suddenly stopped being enough, and what could potentially come after it next. Let's get into it. A few years ago, my wife and I were looking for a new nest. We were looking to rent a house to move in. So we visited a bunch of them, but we saw 2 of them back to back. The first one we visited was a clear winner, at least at first sight. It had this big front yard with surveillance system, electric car gates. It had custom interior design with premium finishes. On every spec, it won. But we walked through it with the real estate agent, and we kind of felt nothing. It was cold. Something was missing. It was empty, and not in terms of furniture. It was empty of something else. It was never really a home. Every choice in it was made by someone who hasn't even seen the house, its owner, the landlord. And most probably, if we hadn't seen the second one right after, it would have been the clear winner. But then we visited the second one, smaller, fewer finishes, but we knew within a minute that this was the one we'll move in. Why? Because a family had actually lived there before. They'd bought it for themselves, built a life in it, and only left because they had to move abroad. It wasn't perfect, but it had something the first one didn't, despite all the features. It had a story. So looking back at that house hunt as a lesson, there's a gap between a house that has everything and a house that has a soul, that has a story. And I think that's the gap AI just opened up in what and how we build software these days. Because right now, we can all build the first house in a weekend, in a week, or a month. We can cramp up features over features and make it look like it has everything. Let's back up a bit on the MVP term. What was it for even? Minimum viable product. I mean, we all throw the term around a lot, for the last decades at least, and everyone fixates on one word, minimum. You strip it down and ship it fast. And I think that's half the misunderstanding. A real MVP was never about stripping a product to the bone and dumping it out the door. It was meant to be a fundamental working model. Crude, for sure, but one that actually solved the problem. We all know this. Viable means it can survive on its own. It means it stands up. It solves a real problem for real people without falling over. If we look way back at, let's say Twitter. The first version, called twttr without the vocals, was almost nothing. You had 140 characters to tell people what you're up to right in that moment. That was it. You had no hashtags or replies or DMs. It was enough because it was viable. It stood up on its own. People used it, and the rest got built from what they did with it. But even getting a product to that viability used to be hard and costly. It took months, it took money, it took a team, or at least a lot of late nights. The cost was annoying, but it also was a filter. Because when something takes 3 months to build, you're kind of forced to ask, oh, is this even worth 3 months of work? That price tag asked the question for you. Then AI showed up, and that cost fell to almost nothing, except tokens, your monthly subsidized subscription, and incredible amounts of electricity, but who's counting? Viable is now weekend and a cursor or clause subscription. The AI writes the code, drafts the copy, designs the layout, spins up the landing page, buys your domain, and even deploys it. All while you binge watch your favorite show on Netflix. What incredible times, right? But when that cost disappeared, the filter disappeared with it. We stopped asking, is this worth building anymore? Because now we just build and ship. Build and ship and build and ship. And the result is a world drowning in viable. In this video, I called out the slop and how we basically fast fashion software. The thing is, minimum viable was always the starting line. That hasn't really changed. What changed is that now everyone can reach it. So the line didn't move really. We're all just standing on it now, which means getting there can't be what sets you apart anymore. Where you go next is, there's an old idea, an old concept in product building called the MLP, a minimum lovable product. Old meaning over 10 years. Now in this age and how fast things move, 10 years is a lifetime. It got on my radar back in 2023, and I wrote a couple of articles around it because it instantly clicked for me. But I guess the concept was too early back then and not ready to replace the MVP as a de facto. For a decade, Lovable was a luxury not everyone could afford, because when reaching viable already eats your entire budget, who's got time and money left to make it delightful and lovable, right? You ship viable, you pray, and you move on. Up until today, MLP was a nice idea for companies with money to burn. Now, AI flipped the whole equation. And I think this 10-year-old concept stands its ground today. So let's draw a clean line here, because this is the whole idea of this video. An MVP asks one question: does this work? An MLP asks a different one: will anyone love using this? Or the way I framed it in the articles back then, an MVP asks, what's the minimum for this to work? And the MLP asks, what's the minimum to make this delightful to use? The MVP is problem and solution, while the MLP is a natural next step because it's about the whole experience. It's built to connect. Does this thing we're building make someone feel something? Do they come back? Do they tell a friend about it? One proves your idea deserves to exist, while the other proves that it deserves to be used. And for 20 years, deserves to exist was the first thing we all optimized for. The assumptions now take probably an afternoon or a few days to be proven, which makes the second question stand out as a new filter. Will anyone actually love this? And if you watched this video, you already know what that question ties back to, because lovability is not a feature you can bolt on. It's actually taste made real. One of the most that AI can copy. The MLP is taste with a deadline and a product attached. Just look at the products people genuinely love right now. Linear, Notion, Canva, Figma, even the smaller delightful products that go under the radar. Nobody loves them because they work. 100 clones work. People love them because of how they feel about it and how they feel when they use them. It's what's beyond the product, the behavioral decisions that make people stick with them. There's this book called Hooked by Nir Eyal that talks about how products build habits through trigger, action, and reward. I won't go much into it right now, but it's a very interesting read. Another part of this lovable factor is something we barely talk about in software, especially these days. Something that connects at emotional level when you build for humans. That's story, which, when it comes to humans, the story beats features, at least for me. I use a lot of products that have less features than their competition simply because they have a better story. And as a quick sidebar here, everything we've built so far in the last decades, in terms of software and products, we've used stories, emotions, and behavioral psychology embodied in them because they were built by humans for other humans. And we are driven by stories and emotions as a species. But interesting now is that as we move forward, the next generation of software and products will be consumed by a second audience that doesn't really care about emotions and stories. The AI agents that will buy, use, and consume the new products out there, they care more about proof, data, and stats. An AI agent will most probably pick a product with more features and no story, which is a very interesting dynamic shift, I have to say. One that probably needs a whole video of itself. So, if we tie this back to my house hunt story, the first one that was staged for rental had more features, and on every spec, it won, but it had no soul and no story. Just because it had more of it didn't make it lovable and delightful. And probably in the absence of a comparison, we would have picked that one. But like I said, the second house, the one we're living in right now, had that lovability factor because someone already lived in it. There was a story there. And that's the 20% that never comes for free. Even if you can build the first 80%, arguably fast, the last 20% is what makes the difference. And it takes a lot more effort and time than we like to admit. And no, it's not about running 50 agents in the same time. I think it's quite the opposite. Even if you can get to 80% in a week, The 20% will most probably take weeks, if not months. And as a quick shameless plug here, I'm running a 6-week one-on-one program to help other founders that are stuck right there at the 80% or less, so they can move the needle and launch their product to the world. This is the founding cohort with limited spots and special pricing. Link below if you want to check it out. Okay, so how do we actually build this lovability in a product without having a bloated mess? I myself confuse the lovable factor with more features probably more times than I like to admit, because the second you stop chasing lovable, scope creep shows up wearing a very nice coat, and every new feature could feel like delight, but it isn't. So 3 things in this video. 1. Find that moment that has to feel right. Normally this is your product's aha moment, that single instant where the value actually lands, the thing the user came for in the first place. To simplify it, for a notes app, it's not the settings page. For a note-taking app, it's the moment you start typing and it just feels good. I, for example, stopped using Notion for personal note-taking for craft. Now, craft has way less features than Notion, that's for sure, and it's lacking a lot of Notion's extensibility. It's far from a perfect tool. But that one thing I cared the most, the writing experience, especially cross-device, that felt just way more polished, and it's the reason I stuck with it. Find that one moment and make that the lovable part. Make it delightful. Everything else is allowed to be viable. That one moment has to be delightful, because people don't fall in love with your whole app. They fall in love with one feeling, and usually they forgive the rest. 2. Live in the house before you rent it out. Same reason that the second house felt like a home, someone actually lived in it, your product is no different. You cannot design lovable in a document. You feel it by using that thing every day, as a real user, not just as the person who built it. This is dog fooding. When you live inside your product and you actually use it, you feel the friction the way a user does. The best products out there are built by people who scratch their own itch. Be your own first user, for real, before anyone else moves in. 3. Build for the second visit, not just the first. Everyone pours everything into the first impression. The launch, the demo, the screenshots for the landing pages, first impression matters, for sure. But that only gets people through the door once. Viable already wins the first visit. It works. People show up, they poke around, but do they come back? Especially when they have tens and hundreds of solutions for the same problem nowadays. So how do you find what earns that second visit? You walk your own product like a story, not a feature list. Start to finish. And at every step, you name what you actually feel. I'm bored here. I'm lost there. Why is it asking me this? And then, somewhere along the way, that one spot where you go, oh, that's nice. That one spot is your reason to come back. Everything around it is just dead air that you hope people will tolerate. So find the dead spots and wake them up. And protect that one good moment with everything you've got. So why aren't MVPs enough anymore? Well, because viable used to be a hard part, and AI made that part significantly easier now. But remember that we're building now for 2 audiences, humans and agents. The agents are never going to love your product. They simply can't. They'll read your stats, count your features, and move on. For them, viable is the whole game, and it's probably enough. But the second there's a human on the other end of your product, viable stopped being enough. Because humans don't fall for features only. They fall for how something feels, for a soul, for a story they want to be part of. And that's the part AI can't build for you. The last 20%. The home, not the house. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.